While on Friday, Mzansi tabled a debate in Parliament calling for reduced advertising and reforms of the country's gambling industry. The party accuses the industry of preying on vulnerable groups. According to the National Gambling Board report for the 2024-2025 financial year, South Africans wagered 1.5 trillion rand on gambling outlets. Now, this month, the Responsible Gambling Summit will host dialogues looking at reforms and controlled advertising in the industry. Advertising of gambling has been cited as one of the major contributors to harmful consumer activity, with calls to reinforce rules and laws monitoring gambling. Let's discuss all of this now, of course, with the Advertising Regulatory Board CEO, Gail Schimmel, as well as the Responsible Gambling Foundation Executive Director, Sibongile Simelane-Quntana. Thank you so much for your time, ladies. It's something I would like to describe as a national crisis, but I think I will start with you, Sibongile, to say, how did we get here? I mean, 1.5 trillion rand of South African households in a country that's currently facing what is a very tight economic situation.
Good morning and coming to your viewers. Look, we got here at an amazingly fast pace, and I think the COVID-19 pandemic, it actually accelerated where we are as a country. You will see that all along the casino land-based operation, not only the casinos, were the ones that were actually leading in terms of revenue and profits. But as soon as we went into COVID, starting from our financial year 2021-2022, we as the foundation, we actually started seeing an increase in the number of people that were experiencing problem gambling and coming and seeking help. And one of the key drivers, were things like they wanted to escape, but escape from what? Because we're in lockdown. Now, the most important question is, how then were people able to know that, online betting is actually available in South Africa? And the only reasonable way in which they became aware of that is through the advertisement that we are seeing on our cell phone, through the vouchers, and as well as on social media.
Yeah, and I think I have to bring in the CEO here. Gail, you heard Sibongile saying that it happened rapidly. I mean, to this point now, when we're seeing advertising, it's almost everywhere. Airports, we're watching soccer, we see it on the team's jerseys. You can't miss it. Social media influencers. How is this allowed in terms of just how much we've seen in terms of this advertising?
So the Advertising Regulatory Board doesn't really deal with the question of how much you see. We deal with the question of what is in the ad. But I'm in agreement with you that there are two issues going on here. There's the issue of how often you're seeing it, and there's the issue of what is actually in the advertising. And we need to deal with both those issues. So at the beginning of this year, we worked together with the National Gambling Board, and we put together all the rules that already exist about gambling advertising. And there are a lot of rules. And I think that's the first thing. Most of the operators are not keeping the existing law. So there's a call for more law, but they're not keeping the existing law as it stands. So that's step one. And we put together code in the advertising code around gambling advertising. The next step is now working together with the industry for stricter rules around advertising, stricter rules around the content of advertising. This is an industry that has got to self-regulate itself and has got to do it well. Otherwise, the entire industry is going to be in danger. So that is what the ARB is working towards next with the industry. We will be speaking at the National at the Gambling Summit. We will be holding a workshop on our draft code in January, and we're working towards stricter rules around the content of gambling advertising. And we will look into whether we feel we have the mandate to talk about the timing of gambling advertising.
Okay, and I'm now joined in studio by Mzansi MP Makashule Gana. Thank you for your time. You brought this matter up to members of Parliament. In fact, you've labelled it and called it South Africa's new pandemic. We are hearing those words kind of flying around in the air: tighter regulations, stronger, legislation. What does that actually look like given the state that we're in now as a country?
Thank you very much, Veronica, and good morning to the other guests. What it looks like, it's less exposure to gambling advertising. What it looks like, it's an increase in the amount that is paid towards responsible gambling. What it looks like, it's a split in terms of the advertising between advertising your product and advertising responsible gambling. What it looks like is when people don't have to gamble their money that they don't have, because the crisis is further exacerbated by people gambling their money that they do not have. They are falling into debt. Some of them, as Sibongile would allude, in terms of others contemplating suicide. Others have committed suicide because gambling addiction, it's a mental health condition. And what is a big problem in South Africa is that we do not have enough mental health institutions. So that's a big problem. Now the burden of care falls on the state. And I have argued that even the taxes that are being paid by these gambling operators is not near enough to pay or to take care of the problem gamblers. So this is what we have proposed in Parliament yesterday, the 7-point plan. We call it the 7-point plan, as Rise Mzansi. And I'm heartened in a way and grateful to the many political parties that have come out strongly in support of the need for gambling reforms. So I left that debate saying, you know what, when I started this particular journey, I was alone. But now I'm joined by members of Parliament. We are singing in one voice. We say we cannot have gambling advertising 24 hours. That one we agree. We agree that people should not be gambling using their overdrafts. And that a significant portion, 40% at least, of the advertising must go towards responsible gambling, must go into educating people around the dangers of gambling. Because if there's one thing that's missing, is that these adverts, they are not educational in nature about the dangers of gambling. You know what they say, Veronica? They say winners know when to stop. But you know what in South Africa? Majority of people who gamble are losers. They are not winners. So if you tell that winners know when to stop, what about the losers? You are saying nothing to the losers. Majority of South Africans are losing money. If South Africans were winning, the gambling companies wouldn't be making 74 billion in gross gambling revenue. The reason they make so much money is because South Africans are losing. But then every advert, it says winners knows when to stop. What about the losers? These adverts are not talking to the losers, which are in the main, are the majority.
Yeah, and I want to bring Sibongile in on that. You hear that comment, winners know when to stop. Gail even spoke about the idea of self-regulation, but how realistic is this, Sibongile?
Veronica, I think the board, my board, is actually seized with the issue that there has been a public outcry to say that winners know when to stop as a slogan is actually in a way a little bit misleading. You will have noticed that we've actually qualified that over the years by saying that a gambling problem hurts, because we actually realized that, we need to drive the strong message home that a gambling problem hurts. Now, the difficulty or the challenge that we are facing is that winners know when to stop is actually regulated in the Gambling Regulations 2004. And for us to be able to actually amend that winners know when to stop and actually speak about the real crux of the issues that is a gambling problem has, we need to engage with the minister, with the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, so that we substitute that slogan with a gambling problem hurts. Because I believe that people will better understand the message around the fact that problem gambling hurts. It hurts because people are unable to put food on the table. People are unable, they are actually, as Mr. Makashule is saying, they are literally gambling their lives away. We have had a number of people, if you've got 700 people that you have treated that are unemployed, who are youth, then we need to say as a country, we actually have a difficulty. Now, those unemployed youth are the youth that are actually receiving the distress discretionary grant that we actually came into COVID. And that money was meant for them to sustain them, because when we're in lockdown, we understand that they were doing piece jobs, but only services were then limited to frontline workers. So that money was meant to sustain them. And now we see those monies being diverted to gambling.
Yeah, and Gail, I see you agreeing there in regards to the realities that this is, of course, hitting South African households and some of those communities the hardest. We spoke a bit about the grey area when it comes to advertising, and I think Mr. Makashule put it in context when he spoke about just how, consistent this advertising is. I can only imagine a minor turning on a football game and being bombarded with gambling adverts. I can imagine someone on their phone seeing their social media as well, social media influencers speaking about this. There's a lot of danger to that. And while you agree, I have to ask, what has been done given these recommendations that have been offered?
So as I've explained, we have got a draft code, and I think that Sibongile has raised exactly where self-regulation is stronger than regulation. Sibongile has pointed out that the responsible gambling message in the regulation no longer works. It's no longer the right message, but it can't be changed because it's in regulation. With self-regulation, we change quickly. So if that was a self-regulated issue, we would be able to change that slogan already. We're able to update our code really quickly. We're able to change what isn't working. We're able to play around with it. We're able to see what works, what doesn't. But the urgent thing is we recognize that government is looking at this problem. We recognize that government is worried about this problem. But the problem does not have the time to wait for government processes. So this is why the ARB, and working with Sibongile and working with the National Gambling Board and working with industry, most importantly, working with industry, we're looking at how can we self-regulate the problem as the Advertising Regulatory Board while everybody else gets it together to do something else, because this problem is an urgent problem.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to point out is that what we're hearing from everybody here, this problem is bigger than advertising. This problem is about what money are you allowed to use. You're allowed to go into your overdraft for gambling. There should be a block on that. This is bigger, and always with these issues, advertising is the easy target. And here, advertising is an issue. I'm not saying it's not, and that's why we are urgently looking at what we can do to make it better, to stop minors seeing it, to stop people seeing it at vulnerable times of day, all that kind of thing. But we have to remember there's a massive socioeconomic problem going on that is driving people to that desperation that they are using their social grants to gamble.
Yeah, and Gail, you've spoken about some of those rules, but what does it look like when, essentially some of these partners or these bodies flout these regulations? What steps essentially do we take? Are there fines that go into place? Just talk to us a little bit about that.
So the Advertising Regulatory Board is all about protecting the consumer. And therefore, our primary thing is that we pull the advertising. If there's misleading advertising, if there's harmful advertising, if there's any advertising in breach of the code, we pull that advertising. And we do that through our member structure and through the power we have through the Electronic Communications Act, where broadcasters are bound by our decisions. We have relationships with Meta, we have relationships with Google, we have relationships with TikTok, where we can send our rulings to them and they will pull the advertising if they agree with those rulings. So it's not about punishment. Punishment is for government. If government wants to introduce a fine, etc., that's for government. We're about protecting the next consumer, so we pull the advertising when it's in breach of the code. I have to also tell you, we can only act when we receive a complaint. And we are not receiving complaints about the right issues. We're receiving complaints from people who didn't win. So we get things from people going, they promised me 50 free spins and I didn't get my 50 free spins. That was one this week. We're receiving complaints from people who just hate gambling. We must stop all gambling. But we're not receiving those complaints, not a lot, where it's actually about what's in the gambling ad. It's appealing to minors. It's giving you the impression that you will have a wonderful life if only you gamble a little bit more. That kind of complaint. So what I would like to encourage viewers to have a look at the code on our website, and if they see an ad that is worrying them, please complain, because we cannot do anything without a complaint.
Yeah. Makashule, I want to bring you into that conversation. You've heard what the board is able to do and in some instances unable to do. Your reaction?
So we are in this situation, I call it a mess actually, because for over 7 years, the body that's supposed to update the regulations was sitting idle. The National Gambling Policy Council did not meet for 7 years. It did not meet. So we are still working with the regulations that were done so many years ago. It hasn't kept up with the changes in the space. Since COVID, there hasn't been any, actually up until the Gambling Council met 6 weeks ago, it had never met since 2018. So COVID came, there was a change in the landscape, and they did nothing. That's why on the 13th, I'm going to the Responsible Gambling Summit. I'm going to tell those operators that are there that the time for you to just flout the rules and say, no, the existing regulations allow us to do this is over. And on the 14th, on the 13th, I'm at the Responsible Gambling Summit. I'm telling the operators. On the 14th, I'm going to the minister to say you must convene the National Gambling Policy Council urgently, and the regulations around advertising must happen before the end of the year. We must update that because that doesn't take long. It doesn't need to go to Parliament. The provincial licensing authorities and the minister can do that. The second thing that we need to get right is the split, because you can't have a situation, Veronica. So the gambling companies, they pay 74 million rands to responsible gambling. But you know how much they spend in marketing and advertising? 2.6 billion. So you say 74 million must go and cancel and rehabilitate. But then when you leave that cancelling and rehabilitation, we'll bombard you with 2.6 billion. In what universe is that fair? Because how do you say, no, this tiny thing, this 0.1%, go and deal with responsible gambling, run your responsible gambling messages. But we are going to put on top of that 2.6 billion. Yeah. And that's why we need to be able to say, no, if you've got 2.6 billion to spend, then at least 1.3 billion, let it go towards responsible gambling. On that one, I know we are not turning back. And members of Parliament support that. So if the gambling industry does not want to change by itself, we in Parliament are going to force them to change. And it will not be nice. I told them that, and I will not stop telling them that.
All right. And Sibongile, just your closing remarks ahead of that summit. What are the tangible outcomes that you are looking for in regards to that?
We are actually working towards developing a national responsible gambling framework as a country. We currently don't have one. It's going to speak to, we've got 6 themes. One on understanding the gambling behavior and the psychological effects, the technological advancements of gambling and what it means in terms of responsible gambling. We'll be dealing with obstacles that prevent us from implementing responsible gambling, such as the funding that we get. And it's not all the 74 million that we receive, by the way, Veronica. There are entities, operators that don't want to contribute to us. And I think we've made peace with that because there is no legislative framework that's currently forcing them to contribute. We're also going to be dealing with issues of what international best practices can we look at. We will be joined by our Canadian counterparts, Gail Insight, Exchange Insight. They'll be coming in and say that how did Canada get to where they are in terms of responsible gambling practices? The funny thing is that, Veronica, they are 20 years, and we are also 20 years as the foundation, but they are far ahead in terms of embracing responsible gambling practices in Canada. So we are looking at those international best practices so that we can actually adopt them in South Africa.
All right. Well, thank you all for those comments, and of course a conversation that needs to be closely monitored, and I think all South Africans should be able to participate in, of course, that responsible gambling summit. Those were, of course, Rise Mzansi MP Makashule, Gana Advertising Regulatory Board CEO Gail Schimmel, as well as Responsible Gambling Foundation Executive Director Sibongile Simelane-Quntana. Thank you all for your time.